The sun had just begun its slow climb above the horizon, painting the rugged hills in soft strokes of gold and amber. Dust curled lazily in the morning light, swirling around the legs of a lone wagon stuck stubbornly in the sand. The desert was still, save for the distant cry of a coyote, a lonely sound that echoed across the wide, empty expanse. Sagebrush whispered with the faint wind, and the earth smelled faintly of dry pine and sun-baked clay. She knelt beside the wagon, her fingers tracing the worn wood of the wheel, feeling its stubborn resistance. Her hands were calloused, evidence of long days under a fierce sun, yet there was a softness in the way she worked, an attention to detail, a careful patience. Her eyes, dark and steady, reflected both the hardship she had endured and a quiet resilience, a spirit that refused to be broken. The wagon had been her lifeline, carrying supplies for her people, her journey across lands that had grown both familiar and hostile. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, wiped the sweat from her brow, and muttered a soft word under her breath, a whisper to herself more than to the world, before tugging at the stubborn will once more. A sound came from behind her, a faint rustle of boots on dry grass, and she tensed, her body coiled like a spring ready to defend. She had learned long ago not to trust easily, not to expect kindness without question. But the sound was careful, measured, and somehow steady, as if it belonged to someone who knew the rhythm of the land. He appeared then, emerging from the haze of morning, dust clinging to his worn jeans and leather jacket. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his eyes, but not enough to hide the quiet calm etched into his face. He was not a man given to theatrics or grand gestures. His presence was steady, rooted in the earth beneath him, like a weathered tree that had seen storms and sun alike. Without a word, he approached the wagon, his boots stirring up small clouds of sand with each step. He stopped a few feet away, letting her study him as she had learned to study strangers. She saw no threat in his eyes, only a measured curiosity, a willingness to help without expectation. "Looks like you could use a hand," he said finally, his voice low, carrying the rough warmth of the desert itself. She hesitated, weighing the offer against a lifetime of caution. But there was something in the steadiness of his gaze, a patience that mirrored her own. She nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the wagon's wheel. Together, they worked in silence, the sound of their labor mingling with the wind. He knelt beside her, his hands strong and capable, yet gentle as they pressed against the stubborn wheel. She watched him, noting the care he took, the way his movements were deliberate, never rushed. There was no show of strength meant to impress, only quiet efficiency and respect for the task at hand. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the sand, a subtle rhythm developed between them. Their movements aligned without conversation, a silent understanding growing in the space between shared effort and mutual acknowledgement. She began to sense that he saw her not as fragile or needing saving, but as a partner in this small struggle against the stubbornness of wood and earth. Finally, with a concerted push and the soft groan of ancient wood, the wheel gave way. The wagon leaned back on a level ground, steady once more. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, a mixture of relief and quiet pride. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice soft but sincere. He tipped his hat slightly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "No need," he said. "It's just a wheel. Anyone could do it." But she could see, in the set of his shoulders, the calm certainty in his hands, that he understood more than he let on. Not just the wheel, but the effort it took to keep moving forward in a world that often demanded more than it gave. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the wagon now steady beneath the rising sun and the desert stretching endlessly around them. There was no rush to speak, no need to fill the space with words. Their quiet companionship, forged in shared labor, was enough. She adjusted the blankets inside the wagon, her hands moving with a familiar grace, while he leaned against the side, watching the horizon with the ease of someone who had spent lifetimes under the open sky. A hawk soared overhead, circling lazily, a silent witness to the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. In that quiet morning, there was a fragile sense of trust, a recognition that the world, harsh as it could be, still held moments of unexpected kindness. And perhaps, just perhaps, these two souls, strangers until now, had glimpsed a connection that might carry them through the days to come. As the sun rose higher, the heat of the desert began to press against them, soft waves shimmering in the distance. He offered a hand to steady the wagon as she adjusted the wheel once more, and she accepted it, her fingers brushing his for the briefest instant. There was nothing romantic in the gesture, not yet, but a gentle acknowledgment of shared humanity, a mutual respect for the strength they both carried quietly within. They parted then, she climbing back in her wagon, he tipping his hat once more before stepping back. Their eyes met briefly, and in that silent glance, a promise lingered, of understanding, of patience, and of the knowledge that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways neither could yet imagine. As she drove away slowly, the wheels spinning over sand that had once trapped them, she felt a subtle lightness in her chest, an unfamiliar ease that perhaps only came when someone saw you as you truly were, brave, capable, and human. And he watched her go, standing in the morning light, the wind catching at his jacket, feeling a quiet stirring in his chest that he did not yet name. The desert stretched endlessly around him, but for the first time that morning, he felt less alone. The day stretched on, the sun climbing higher, and though neither spoke again as they went their separate ways, a thread of connection had been woven, a thread that would hold, quietly, until the world demanded more of them than they had yet imagined. And somewhere, in the distance, the faint sound of hooves echoed across the plains, a whisper of things to come, unnoticed by the two figures who had found, in the stillness of the morning, a fragile moment. Night had fallen softly over the desert, draping the land in a velvet darkness sprinkled with stars. The moon, a pale witness to the quiet lives below, cast long silver shadows that stretched like gentle fingers across the sand. By a small fire, the cowboy and the Apache woman sat, each tending their own thoughts as the flames danced, flickering in the cool night air. Smoke curled lazily upward, carrying the scent of pine wood and the faint hint of dust from the trail. The firelight cast a warm glow on her face, illuminating the curve of her cheek and the depth of her eyes, which reflected not only the fire but the weight of a journey she had traveled alone for too long. She spoke first, softly, her words almost a whisper, meant more for the fire than for him. She spoke of the land she had crossed, of rivers that gleamed like molten silver in the morning sun, of winds that carried both blessing and danger. He listened quietly, the embers mirrored in his own steady gaze, his hands resting on his knees, unhurried, as if time itself slowed to match the rhythm of their shared solitude. "I didn't think anyone would stop," she said finally, glancing at him out of the corner of her eye. "Most just pass by, or they watch from the shadows." He shrugged, a small, understated movement. The world moves fast, and most people move faster. But sometimes, someone slows down long enough to notice. Her lips curved slightly, almost a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes entirely. There was a trace of something fragile there, a memory of past disappointments, yet also the spark of cautious hope. She felt safer in his presence, though she did not yet understand why. Perhaps it was the steadiness in his hands, the quiet patience in his voice, or the way he seemed to see her as she was capable, brave, and unbroken. They shared stories then, not of love or grand heroics, but of small, simple things, a stream that always ran cold in the spring, a horse that refused to be tamed, a song carried on the wind from another place. And in these small tales, something delicate began to grow, a sense of companionship, a mutual understanding that did not demand anything but presence. The night deepened, and with it came a profound quiet. Only the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of desert creatures disturbed the stillness. Somewhere far off, a coyote called again, and she shivered, not from cold, but from the subtle reminder that the world could be both beautiful and dangerous. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small loaf of bread, breaking it into pieces and offering it to her. She accepted without hesitation, their fingers brushing lightly, a contact that was neither accidental nor deliberate, but simply natural, an acknowledgement of shared trust. They ate in silence for a few moments, the firelight reflecting off the wagon wheel nearby, now steady and resting from its earlier struggle. In that quiet, she felt an ease she had not known in years. The desert, which could feel so lonely and unforgiving, suddenly seemed less vast. There was a human connection here, fragile yet undeniable, a tether in the emptiness of the plains. Morning came slowly, spreading pale gold over the horizon. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of sage and distant pine. They rose together, moving with the familiarity of long-practiced rhythm despite having met only yesterday. The wagon needed tending, and there were chores that the land required of those who traveled its expanse. She adjusted the wheel once more, checking the iron rim for cracks, while he moved a fallen branch from their path, his motions deliberate, steady, a quiet dance of cooperation. At one point, they stopped to rest beneath the shade of a solitary mesquite. She leaned against its rough bark, feeling its strength against her back, and he sat nearby, silent, observing the desert with careful eyes. There was a stillness here, a pause in the endless march of the day, a moment to breathe, to simply exist alongside one another. "You ever wonder why the wind always seems to know where it's going?" she asked, her voice soft, contemplative. He smiled faintly, a shadow of humor touching his lips. "Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just moves and leaves the rest for us to figure out." She chuckled, the sound low and musical, carrying across the dry grass. And for a moment, the weight of the world seemed lighter, as if laughter alone could push back the vast, indifferent desert. But the calm was not to last. As they worked, he noticed small signs that made his chest tighten, a subtle unease that settled over him like dust before a storm. Tracks in the sand, too deliberate, too numerous, showed a presence not meant for peaceful passage. Faint traces of war paint in the distance, markings on stones and wood, suggested riders circling, watching, waiting. He said nothing at first, letting the quiet persist. There was no need to alarm her unnecessarily, yet he could not ignore what his instincts whispered. The land had a memory, and he had learned to read it with care. Something was approaching, something that would demand courage, attention, and unity. By mid-morning, they encountered a few travelers on the trail, a merchant with a cart of cloth, a young boy leading a mule, a pair of elderly women tending a small herd. Each greeted them with nods, smiles, and brief words. The side characters were small, but essential, grounding the world in a sense of lived reality. They commented quietly on the cowboy's steady nature, the woman's resilience, and the odd beauty of their cooperation. These interactions, fleeting though they were, reminded her that not all the world was harsh or indifferent. Kindness existed in small pockets, often unexpected, and it could grow quietly if tended with care. As the sun climbed higher, its heat pressing gently against their shoulders, the cowboy and the woman paused by a shallow stream to refill their canteens. Water sparkled in the sunlight, dancing over pebbles in a way that seemed almost magical. She knelt at the edge, cupping the cool liquid in her hands, and he stood behind her, keeping watch over the empty expanse beyond. Their silence was comfortable, a conversation without words, a dialogue of presence and trust. In that moment, she felt the slow bloom of something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Not hope of adventure or escape, but hope of connection, of being seen and understood without judgment. And he felt something equally rare, a sense of belonging, a quiet recognition that this shared journey mattered, not for the destination, but for the companionship along the way. By late afternoon, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and smoke. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough for him to notice. He tensed slightly, scanning the horizon with careful eyes. The war-paint riders were near, though she did not yet know it. The calm of the day had been an illusion, a temporary gift. The storm was approaching, and soon the quiet companionship they had cultivated would be tested. Yet even in the shadow of danger, their bond had strengthened. The small gestures, the shared labor, the moments of laughter, the silence broken only by the wind or the water, had woven a tapestry of trust and understanding. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the desert bathed in the warm glow of late afternoon. They made camp once more. The fire crackled and popped, shadows stretching across the sand. She prepared a simple meal while he tended the fire, and in the quiet ritual of cooking and feeding, they shared another unspoken truth. The small acts of care, the shared burdens, the moments of understanding, were what made life in this harsh land bearable. The evenings settled around them like a soft blanket. Stars shimmered faintly, and the desert hummed with the subtle rhythm of nocturnal life. Somewhere far off, the faint sound of hooves echoed again, carried by the wind. A whisper of things to come, unnoticed yet inevitable. They lay back on their blankets near the fire, eyes tracing constellations, hearts aligned in quiet companionship. And though neither spoke of what the morrow might bring, both felt its presence like a shadow at the edge of the camp. The war-paint riders were coming, and with them, the test of courage, trust, and the bond they had slowly nurtured. And yet, despite the looming threat, there was a fragile peace in that shared. The desert morning arrived slowly, stretching gold and amber over the rugged hills. A gentle wind stirred the sagebrush and the dust, carrying with it the faint, distant scent of pine and something else, something sharper, faintly metallic, like the promise of trouble. The world felt both vast and intimate at once, a paradox that pressed against the chest and reminded the soul of its own fragile endurance. The cowboy stirred from his blanket, rising before dawn, letting his gaze wander across the rolling expanse. He took in the contours of the land, the way the sun's first light painted each ridge, each crevice in subtle hues. The world was beautiful and indifferent, harsh and forgiving in the same breath. He thought of the Apache woman, still sleeping near the wagon, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, a quiet testament to resilience. He reflected on the strange alchemy of fate that had brought them together. Yesterday, a stubborn wheel had become a bridge between strangers, and in that simple act, something rare had begun to take root, a connection not born of desire or expectation, but of recognition, of seeing another human being fully and without judgment. Far off, the faint echo of hooves brushed against the horizon. He sensed them more than saw them, subtle disturbances in the dust, shadows that moved just out of rhythm with the wind. The war-paint riders were near, circling, watching, and yet their approach was measured, patient. The cowboy felt a tightening in his chest, a quiet alarm that he could not ignore. She stirred as the sun rose, her dark hair catching the light, her face serene despite the tension that would soon arrive. She smiled softly at him, a half-formed gesture of trust and quiet amusement, and he offered a small nod in return. Words were unnecessary. Their bond had been built in shared labor, laughter, silence, and now, in the unspoken awareness of the world around them. They moved through their morning routine with practiced ease, tending to the wagon, refilling water, checking supplies. The air was cool, the desert breathing softly around them. He noticed her subtle glances, the way her hands moved confidently over tasks, the unspoken grace in her posture. She was not fragile. She was not naive. And yet, like the land itself, she carried the weight of unspoken dangers, memories of hardships endured alone. By mid-morning, they paused at a shallow stream to drink. Water shimmered over the rocks, catching sunlight in tiny sparks, each droplet a prism of hope in the vast, unforgiving expanse. She knelt at the edge, cupping the water in her hands, and he stood close by, eyes scanning the horizon with careful vigilance. Their shared silence was comfortable, a conversation beyond words. Trust had grown here, not from grand declarations, but from quiet presence. As the sun climbed, the wind shifted. He noticed small traces in the sand, irregular hoof prints, faint marks in the scrub, a hint of paint smudged across a rock. The war paint riders were near. The realization was quiet but urgent, pressing against the edges of his calm. He did not alarm her immediately, letting her move and act naturally, testing the ground, unaware of the shadow approaching. She sensed a shift, subtle as it was. The desert, which had been a place of stillness, carried a faint tension now, like the quiet before a storm. Her hand brushed instinctively against the edge of the wagon, a gesture of preparation, of readiness. Though she did not yet know the nature of the threat, she trusted him, trusted his presence and his vigilance. Hours passed with quiet labor. They mended a broken wheel spoke, gathered firewood, and prepared a small meal. Each motion was deliberate, rhythmic, almost ceremonial. The mundane tasks held a sacred weight. The act of surviving, of caring for oneself and each other, became an intimate dance of life. The desert was alive with whispers. A hawk wheeled overhead, its shadow crossing the sand. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried, the sound echoing against distant ridges. And beneath the surface, hidden in the dust and rocks, the riders moved closer. The cowboy's senses were attuned, each sound and movement read like a page from an open book. He felt the inevitability of confrontation, a storm that would arrive with neither warning nor delay. And yet, despite the approaching danger, there was a calm that neither sought nor commanded. They shared moments of laughter and lightness, small gestures that anchored them in humanity. She brushed sand from her hands, and he offered a towel with a quiet smile. She caught his eye, and in that glance, unspoken understanding passed between them. They would face whatever came, together if need be. Mid-afternoon, a distant horn echoed across the plains, a signal of presence, deliberate and measured. He squinted at the horizon, noting the movement of dust and shadow. The riders were circling, hurting the space around them, testing the boundaries of control. He felt a pulse of anxiety, not fear, but the alert awareness of responsibility. He had promised himself to protect this fragile trust, to preserve the bond that had grown overnight. She watched him closely, noticing the shift in his posture, the tightening of his jaw, the careful way he scanned the horizon. Her respect for him deepened. Not for his skill, not for any heroics, but for the quiet steadiness, the refusal to let fear dictate action. She realized that he saw her as she truly was, brave, capable, and unbroken. Time moved with a strange elasticity, minutes stretching and contracting. The sun burned higher, heat pressing down, yet neither moved in haste. Their survival was rooted in patience, in deliberate motion, in careful observation. The tension between peace and danger hung thick in the air, like dust suspended in sunlight. As evening approached, the first hints of color bled into the sky. Pale lavender, soft pink, muted orange. The desert softened in the fading light, but the rider's presence lingered invisibly. Every sound, the rustle of sage, the distant cry of an owl, the movement of a lizard across the sand, carried new weight. He taught her how to notice subtle signs, a broken twig, a disturbed stone, a whisper in the wind. She absorbed each lesson quickly, her instincts honed by years of survival, but now paired with trust in another human being. By nightfall, their camp was established once more. The fire flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that painted the sand in shifting patterns. They prepared their modest meal, eating slowly, deliberately. Each bite was a quiet act of mindfulness, a grounding ritual that kept fear at bay. She leaned back against the wagon, watching the stars emerge in delicate clusters, constellations ancient and indifferent. He sat beside her, silent, listening to the desert breathe. Their eyes met occasionally, a shared acknowledgement of the tension that surrounded them, and the quiet triumph of having survived another day. And in the distance, carried faintly on the wind, the faint sound of hooves echoed once more. The war-paint riders had drawn closer, circling, testing, waiting. Tomorrow, the storm would arrive. But tonight there was calm, a fragile, deliberate calm, the kind that nourishes courage. Dawn crept over the horizon, spilling soft pink and gold across the desert. The air was cool but held the faint tang of tension, a quiet electric hum beneath the stillness. The cowboy stood at the edge of his cabin, eyes scanning the distant ridges, his hands brushing lightly against the worn wood of the porch. Somewhere beyond the hills, shapes moved, silhouettes dark against the rising sun. War-paint riders, circling, patient and deliberate, like shadows stretched thin over the land. The Apache woman stirred beside him, stepping quietly from the wagon as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. Her dark eyes were sharp, yet calm, reflecting a bravery born of countless trials and a trust that had slowly grown overnight. She did not flinch, though the presence of the riders carried a weight heavier than any burden she had borne alone. He spoke first, voice low and deliberate, more for himself than for her. "They're here," he said, almost a whisper. "We'll need to be clever, not just fast." She nodded, understanding without words. There was no fear in her movements, only purpose. Together, they moved with quiet efficiency, tending to the cabin, checking doors and windows, positioning supplies and small traps. Not weapons of war, but tools of ingenuity and cunning. Each motion was precise, deliberate, a dance of preparation and awareness. The riders drew closer, their presence unmistakable now. The distant clatter of hooves pressed against the ears like a pulse, steady and threatening. Their painted faces caught in the morning sun, fierce and unyielding, mirrored the harshness of the land itself. Yet, inside the cabin, a calm determination held them both steady. They had faced the vast silence of the desert together. A handful of riders would not break the trust and courage they had nurtured. The first rider appeared on a ridge, scanning the cabin with sharp eyes. The cowboy crouched behind a stack of firewood, whispering directions to the woman. She moved with quiet grace, setting small diversions, loose boards, scattered stones, to confuse and delay. Each action was calculated, a reflection of their combined intelligence rather than brute strength. The riders tried to press closer, yet the cabin and its defenders were clever. The woman's sharp gaze caught a shadow moving in the wrong rhythm, and she signaled him. Together, they adjusted positions, their silent communication seamless, a testament to the bond forged over hours of labor, conversation, and trust. Time seemed to stretch as the sun climbed higher. She smiled softly, eyes reflecting the firelight and the starlight, the deep knowledge of survival and connection. And sometimes, it's enough to save more than just yourself. Their hands brushed briefly, lightly, intentionally, not a grand gesture, but a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they had nurtured. They did not need to speak of love or promise. The story of the day, the night, and the desert itself was proof enough. Two souls had met, survived, and seen each other fully. And so, as the night deepened, the cowboy and the Apache woman sat by the fire, the wind carrying whispers of the desert, of distant hills, and the stories that would be told long after. They had faced fear together, nurtured trust, and discovered that even in a harsh and indifferent world, small acts of courage, kindness, and understanding could create something enduring. The narrator leans closer, a soft voice in your ear, whispering across time. Life is vast, often harsh, but notice the quiet kindness around you. Treasure the souls who see you fully. And sometimes, the smallest gestures, helping a wagon wheel, offering a hand, sharing a fire, can ripple into moments that save not just your heart, but the hearts of others too. And as you watch this story unfold, remember, wherever you are, whatever your horizon looks like, there's always the chance for trust, courage, and quiet love to bloom. Share it, hold it, and let it guide you. Now, Take a breath and tell us, from where are you watching this story? Share your thoughts, your heart, and if this tale touched you, like, comment, and subscribe. The desert waits, the sun rises, and stories like these are meant to be remembered.